Hey everybody, quick question. What is TEDx? I don't know, I'm just kidding. My name's Nato Green, I'm a comedian. I have jokes. I'm apparently not doing stand-up comedy tonight though, because of that thing. I don't know quite how the rules work, but people keep telling me that comedians are like the public intellectuals of our time, so let's test that theory, shall we? Proof of concept that to demonstrate to you that I am a political comic that has jokes. Here, let me tell you some jokes right now to convince you that I'm plausibly a comedian. Joke number one. I am a Jew. That's why I'm really excited about Bernie Sanders. I'm very excited about the possibility of the first Jewish president. But as a Jew, I'm not super into the slogan, feel the burn. I prefer burn the Jew. So, I have things to say to you about politics. Some people don't want to talk about politics. They're like, Nato, why do you got to talk about politics? What do politics have to do with me? I'm not an immigrant or a black person or a Muslim or a Jew or gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or a woman, or an old person, or a young person, or a student, or teacher, or artist, or scientist, or union member, or renter, or public employee. I don't breathe the air or drink the water. I don't live in a place that will be affected by drought, fire, or sea level rise. I'm not mentally ill, pregnant, disabled, or currently being shot at, so what do politics have to do with me? That's a fair point. It's hard to argue with that. I have no retort. It is a difficult time to be a comedian, a political comedian at this moment in our country's history, because just to take you behind the curtain of comedy, every joke involves an exaggeration. Here's a thought I had, here's an absurdist exaggeration to illustrate my point. But today's headlines 10 years ago were our punchlines. You understand what I'm saying? 10 years ago we were doing jokes like, that'd be crazy, it'd be like if Donald Trump was the president. And that used to be a funny thing to say. And so it's like, how do you even write jokes now? Like, what are the mechanics of jokes? Like, if I was like, that'd be crazy, it'd be like if Mike Pence's butthole was a portal to another dimension. You all be like, that too, fine, sure, whatever. That's as plausible as everything else that's happening, so why not? It's a difficult time also because people are really struggling with like, how do we understand this moment in history? You know, some people are like, is it like Nazi Germany? Is it like apartheid South Africa? Is it like McCarthyism in the 50s? Is it like Arizona at any point ever? Like, what is it like? So, and here we are in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of technology. The tech people, I think we can all agree the tech people are inventing the wrong stuff. They're not inventing the things that we need. Now we have wildfires in California. I'm terrified about these wildfires. A new thing to be afraid of, which is fire cyclones. There are fires now that go 200 miles an hour. That's terrifying to me. It's like, hey, tech people, could you maybe invent something that will stop a fire cyclone? And the tech people are like, no, we're busy. We're inventing Shazam for soup. So, you don't know. It could be a gazpacho or a chowder, a bouillabaisse, or a bisque. You don't know. You need an app. Inventing the wrong stuff. Hey, tech people, the IPCC climate report says that we only have 11 years to reduce carbon emissions enough to avert the catastrophic collapse of civilization due to climate change. Could you maybe invent something that'll suck the carbon out of the sky? And the tech people are like, no, we're busy. We're inventing Uber for Uber. So like if you don't have Uber, you can see who around you has Uber, and then get that guy to call you an Uber. So we do that first, and then we'll suck the carbon out of the sky. Any questions? There's a thing that I like to talk about sort of comedy, how comedy is involved in politics, and the relationship between comedy and politics. And like if you, normally I say it because people give me alcohol and then I start talking, and they're like, that seems interesting, you should write that down at some point. But I've never actually said it in public, so this is an experiment. And I also, no one gave me alcohol, which is offensive. And I'm gonna write a letter. That there was no whiskey in the green room, and that is usually my writers. Anyway, so I have, as a hybrid comedian and union organizer, I have very strong feelings about social change and about how the world changes, and also about comedy and how jokes work. And often those things collide, those worlds collide, and I've had the opportunity to do experiments. Many years ago, NARAL Pro-Choice America, the nation's preeminent pro-choice advocacy and organizing group, approached me about doing a series of experiments around involving comedians in abortion rights work. I realize this is a Catholic institution and sometimes the politics of abortion get a little dicey around Catholic institutions, but fortunately, because it's a Catholic institution, hopefully someone around here can figure out how to forgive me. So, hope there's someone with expertise in that area. So, what's my point? Abortions. Anyway, no, jokes. So often, like the way that people thinking about politics engage with comedy is in a way that I would describe as very instrumentalist. Like it's very focused on celebrities and a single out deliverable. They're like, hey, can you get Sarah Silverman to retweet about our thing or whatever? Or can we get Dave Chappelle to appear in a video about this thing and talk about this thing? And it's focused on one celebrity and one thing, and it's fine. Those are good things to do, and I like the people who do that work. But mostly what they're talking about, and there's a whole world of foundations and political consultants now talking about the idea of cultural change, and mostly what they're talking about, the way that they're talking about it is not the way that I think about culture, but it's marketing. They're using marketing metrics, like how many retweets, how many eyeballs, how many impressions. Those are all marketing standards. That's not culture. And I learned to think about culture because when I was in college, I studied American cultural history. My college advisor told me that my writing was occasionally eloquent, which I appreciate. I'm also, my wife is an anthropologist, and so because my wife is an anthropologist, in my house, if you talk about culture in a way that is stupid, you get hit with a sandal. So we talk about culture differently in my house, and it's not just like how many retweets, that's not culture. The way that we talk about culture is that culture is diffuse and unpredictable. Decentralized. Culture is bottom-up politics. Culture is chaotic. So the way that comedy contributes to social change is in the same way that the rest of culture contributes to social change, which is that frequently the things that happen in the political and the legal system are the last stage in the process. That the law being passed or the court decision being rendered happens at the very end, and there's like a whole long process of things bubbling up through culture, through theory, through community organizing, before it finally culminates in the political system. And you can't plan it. So if you like focus group it and try to plan it out and make a calendar, it's going to be nonsense. My favorite example of this is Bill Cosby. So Bill Cosby has now been convicted of sexual assault. Do you remember where that started? It started with a comedian who was not Bill Cosby. The whole cascade of events that led to Bill Cosby being prosecuted began with comedian Hannibal Buress doing a stand-up show in Philadelphia and talking about, he was doing jokes about Bill Cosby and sexual assault, and someone put it in a blog, and then it blew up. Now, I can tell you with some amount of confidence that Hannibal was not intending to like take down Bill Cosby when he did that bit. He was trying to work out a joke that he thought he was in a world, people were talking about this thing, and comedians, it was something that comedians knew and talked about, and so Hannibal was working on a joke, and he said it, and then it blew up. My guess, from comedian to comedian, my guess is that from Hannibal's perspective, there's some small part of him that's annoyed that like everything that happened after that ruined 3 minutes of good comedy for him. Because he was just focused on working on jokes. So you couldn't have planned that. Nobody could have said, okay, I'm going to do some jokes about this thing, and then 30 women are going to come forward or whatever, then there's going to be a trial, and it's going to be on the cover of all these newspapers. That wasn't planned. And so when you want to think about how comedians can contribute to changing the world and advancing political process, the way that I think about it is you want to create the conditions in which unpredictable things can happen. You want to plant a lot of seeds and hope that some things flower, if that makes any sense at all. The second component, I have 3 things. So one of them is that culture is diffuse and unpredictable and dynamic. The second thing is that comedians are a community that can be organized. people are often being like, hey, will you come and donate your time to this thing, like this TED Talk or whatever? Or will you come and do a benefit show for us? Or will you come and write jokes for this thing? It's a very transactional relationship, but comedians are a constituency and a community of people who can be organized around the conditions of their lives and their interests on their own terms. So, for instance, when I was doing my project with NARAL Pro-Choice America, there are a lot of comedians that had their own connection to that issue. A lot of comedians who were concerned about their own access to reproductive health care, who had a tenuous connection to health insurance on their own and were worried about their ability to access family planning, who were reliant on Planned Parenthood. A lot of comedians who were offended and outraged by the way that the right wing was attacking choice and wanted to connect, wanted to involve. And when I talk about organizing people on their own terms, what it means is that like the infrastructure, like a lot of advocacy organizations and people who think about politics who are not mainly comedy fans only know the most famous comedians in the world and don't know the less famous people, like Nato Green, at Nato Green on Twitter. You know what I'm saying? So they would like, and so they don't, and then they would wait until people are famous, and then they get excited. Like you saw this a lot. People like Amy Schumer had Inside Amy Schumer, and people had this great feminist comedy, and people got very excited about Amy Schumer, and like there was no, we're not paying attention to Amy Schumer like grinding it out for years in comedy clubs, and so there's not like an apparatus to support comedians. There are a lot of comedians who like want to be engaged in politics and talk about social justice and talk about values that they care about, but as it happens, that's not where the money is in show business. I don't know if you know this, but the entertainment industry is a capitalist enterprise that is primarily focused on making money, and they're not about human liberation or ending racism or sexism or anything else like that. If that happens, that's sort of incidental to them. So, you know, they're not opposed, but if it's lucrative, then they're interested. So, you know, but people have to go where the money is. So, you know, there's a lot of like, well, I really want to talk about the system and how the system fails working class people. I really want to talk about misogyny, and I really want to talk about xenophobia or whatever. And then you're like, and then you're in these meetings, and the network people like, could you maybe say that in a dumber way and talk about also like Tinder dating or whatever? So you're always bumping against that. But comedians want to talk about that. And so if you understand how to engage comedians based on where they are in the ecosystem of comedy and can give them opportunities, people will respond. The third component is that comedy contributes the best to social change when it is out of control. So frequently, advocates will bring comedians to events and will want to control the message. I've had people like who would hire, like NARAL, when they were working with us, there were like lawyers that wanted to review our jokes. And we were like, you hired us we're the ones who know about comedy, shouldn't you stay out of it? And so, and the reason for that is that comedy sort of has the effect of smashing open the parameters of respectable conversation. That we can say unreasonable things so that the advocates seem more reasonable. We can create more space. And comedy at its best is like people make jokes, and then it plants a flag in your brain where you can't think about that thing without thinking about the joke about that thing. Like Chris Rock is the best at this. Chris Rock is the best at this. Like Chris Rock years ago did this joke about minimum wage, where he said minimum wage is your boss's way of saying minimum wage is your boss's way of saying I would pay you less if I could, but it's the law. And so people put that joke, like when organizers were campaigning to raise the minimum wage, people put that joke on flyers. They were like, this is what we're talking about, this Chris Rock joke. And particularly, my favorite example of this is the Chris Rock special, Never Scared. There's a bunch of those bits where he talks about the difference between rich and wealthy, and only white people can profit from pain, and behind every great fortune is a great crime. These like big ideas that he's conveying with jokes. And now when you want to think about those things, it's just easy to be like, hey, let's go put on the Chris Rock special. And that there's, as that happens, it makes space. So, and it creates opportunities for the advocates. So the other circumstance where I've done it, besides working with NARAL, I've done it a lot with tenants groups that are working on gentrification. And one of my favorite things to do is go to government hearings and get up during public comment and make fun of my political enemies to their faces. Because I don't know if you know this, and if there's any aspiring comics here, you need to know that there are government hearings that have public comment, and then they are legally required to allow you to talk for 2 minutes. And even if you're not on topic. And so it's like the best open mic, because everyone is very uncomfortable and angry, and then you come in with jokes, and people get very excited. So I went to a hearing about some issue about evictions, and I listened to and I brought other comedians with me who had also felt their rent increases and been evicted, and we listened to 2 hours of testimony, and these landlord lobbyists that were speaking against the thing, saying, you know, we should be allowed to evict people, and then we got to get up and make fun of them to their faces, and that was very gratifying. There was one time I was speaking. I live in San Francisco and I own my house, and I have a room in my house that I rent out to a friend. So technically, I am a landlord. And so I was at a hearing about rent control, and I got up at the hearing and I said, "Hello, my name is Nato Green, and Nato Green on Twitter, and I am a mom and pop landlord, and I speak on behalf of all mom and pop landlords in the state of California." And the other landlords started clapping, and I said, "On behalf of all small landlords, I 100% support rent control and believe we need to extend rent control to all tenants in California." And then I almost got punched out by some very angry landlords. So that was fun. So it was, and then I went on to make jokes, and I said, "Look, you know, it's very easy to make a lot of money as a landlord in California because the rents are so high and housing is so expensive. And if you find it difficult to be a landlord without ruining someone's life, then maybe this is not the right line of work for you, and you should try an easier profession." And then the tenant activists took that line and started putting it in their flyers. That worked for them. Being a landlord in California is the easiest job. So, what's my point? The comedians can explode the debate. And one of the things that people say a lot when you talk about comedy and social change is like, are you preaching to the converted? You know, that you're not, are you changing minds? And often you're not. Like, you know, sometimes you're changing people's minds. Often you're talking to people who agree with you generally, but, you know, people, like, you surface disagreements, you know what I mean? Like, I'd face hostile audiences all the time, even people who agree with me politically on some issues. Then I come out and make fun of sports, and then people want to murder me. So that happens all the time. But but you know, sometimes you're preaching to the converted. Sometimes you're making people feel less alone. Sometimes you're responding to the political currents. Like, comedians don't, and art in general doesn't only shape the world, it responds to the world. You know, that the Richard Pryor and George Carlin did not create the counterculture, they responded to the counterculture. They were just comedians, and then the counterculture of the 60s happened, and they went out to be the comedic expression of it. Somebody told me this saying about the civil rights movement, that you'll know that there's a new movement being born when you can hear it singing. And I think that's true of music, that's true of comedy too. You'll know that there's a new movement being born when it has its own dick jokes. So that's part of how culture works, is it finds every political current finds an expression in the arts, and then part of the job of the comedian is to find that audience to speak to and relate to. You know, one of the groups of people that I always am wanting to speak to and relate to are workers who are trying to organize their unions. And I do know that here at Santa Clara University, the adjuncts have been trying to organize a union, and the Trump administration has made that impossible for them. So because of their religious affiliation, they're not allowed to, and I think that the adjuncts here should be allowed to decide if they want to have a union or not without Trump getting involved. It's I know a radical thought, but I think the administration here should respect the faculty's wishes. I want to leave you with one more joke. I have kids, and I have 11-year-old twins, and I realize that you don't have kids and you don't like kids. And I know that you don't have kids because I can see you. But I have kids, and one of the things that's interesting, like the right wing often uses children to justify their political arguments. They'll be like, how am I going to explain transgender people to my kids, or whatever? And now that I have kids, what I can tell you is that you don't have to explain that to your kids. Your kids will explain that to you. You just have to be quiet. So here's an example. I have 11-year-old twins. One of my kids said to me that they were gender fluid, and they wanted to use they, them pronouns. And I said, cool. I said, you know, honey, we know another kid who's older than you who is transgender, and they go to a group for queer and trans kids, and maybe you want to go to that group and find some community and get some support. And my kid said, no, I don't want to go to that group. That kid is trans. They're still in the gender binary. I'm gender fluid. I'm not in the gender binary. What has that group got to do with me? And then I blacked out. And I fell through the quantum realm, and I high-fived a tardigrade. I hugged Judith Butler. I was Schrodinger's gender, occupying all genders and none simultaneously. Like, I'm of a different generation. Like, getting to that level of clarity about, like, they're in the gender binary, I'm not in the gender binary, that was, for my generation, that's 4 years of study at UC Santa Cruz. Like, night after night, like, oh, how does this carry the 7? Like, trying to work it out. My kid doesn't need me to explain stuff to them. They're like, my kid is on strike against the concept of gender. My kid is in a lab reinventing gender for the 21st century. They don't need my help. They're just like, Daddy, no talking, make me a sandwich. So that's what I'm gonna do. Rise up, everyone. Good night.